December 1st, 1939. As the Second World War expanded across Europe and nations collapsed under the weight of invading armies, a single unknown farmer from Finland stepped into a conflict that would transform him into one of the most astonishing figures in military history. His name was Simo Häyhä, and within just a few weeks, soldiers on both sides would whisper another name, the one that would echo across frozen forests, military reports, and later, history books: the White Death. Before the Winter War began, Hayha was not a soldier by profession. He lived quietly in the rural community of Rautjärvi, near the Soviet border, hunting, farming, and practicing the kind of marksmanship that only comes from a lifetime in the outdoors. He was modest, reserved, and physically small, just 5 feet 3 inches tall. Nothing about him seemed extraordinary. No one imagined he would become the deadliest sniper of the entire Second World War. But when the Soviet Union launched its invasion of Finland, Hayha volunteered without hesitation, not for glory, not for ideology, simply because the enemy had crossed into his home. That was all he needed. The Soviet generals who ordered the invasion expected Finland to fall within days. Their army was massive. Tanks, artillery, aircraft, 500,000 troops against them stood a small nation with barely a fraction of their resources. But numbers don't describe war. People do. And in the forests of Karelia, they were about to meet a man unlike anyone they had ever faced. On his first day in combat, Hayha carried a simple bolt-action rifle fitted with iron sights, not a scope. He didn't trust scopes. Glass could reflect sunlight, reveal a shooter's position, fog up, or crack in the cold. Iron sights were reliable, stable, fast. Simplicity meant survival. And accuracy. For Hayha, accuracy was not a skill. It was a language he had spoken his whole life. From childhood, he hunted small game in dense forests where a missed shot meant no food. He learned patience, stillness, and absolute precision. He learned how to disappear into the environment without effort, how to read the slightest movement, how to shoot without flinching in brutal conditions. He brought all of that into the war. What happened next stunned even his own commanders. Within days, reports began to filter through Finnish lines. Soviet soldiers were being struck one by a shooter no one could see. Patrols vanished. Scouts collapsed before they realized they were being hunted. Squads attempted to advance, and each time a man leaned over cover or stepped into the open, he fell instantly. The Soviets believed it was a team, multiple shooters coordinating. It wasn't. It was one man. Hayha didn't talk much. He didn't brag. He didn't even seem to think what he was doing was unusual. When officers asked how many Soviet soldiers he had hit that day, he usually answered with a single number and no emotion at all. 10, 7, 11. His numbers were so high that his own superiors double-checked them. Every kill had to be confirmed by a witness. They were. By mid-December, his reputation had already reached mythic proportions along the front. Soviet officers, confused and frustrated, ordered their own snipers to find him. They failed. They sent larger teams. They failed. They shelled entire sections of the forest, blasting trees into splinters. But when the smoke cleared, Hayha was still there, silent, unseen, and waiting. One Soviet sniper came close. He spotted a faint disturbance in the snow, something small and almost invisible. He raised his rifle. Before he could fire, Hayha shot first. When the Soviets recovered the body, they found a bullet hole clean through the enemy sniper's scope, straight into the eye behind it. A near impossible shot for Hayha. It was simply another moment of absolute control. His legend grew with every passing day. What baffled Soviet commanders even more than his accuracy was his lack of fear. Most soldiers trembled in the freezing forests. Hayha operated in them as if the cold belonged to him. Many Soviet troops suffered frostbite within hours. Hayha spent entire days lying motionless on the snow, waiting, watching, calculating. He used techniques no manual had taught him. He packed snow tightly in front of his firing position so it wouldn't scatter when he shot. He built small mounds to hide his silhouette. He kept his rifle cold so it wouldn't warp from the heat of his breath. He chewed snow before firing so his warm exhale wouldn't reveal his position. He tracked targets without ever showing panic or urgency. He simply existed in the landscape, blending into it so completely that even trained Soviet eyes could not find him. By late December, Soviet troops refused to step into certain areas. They didn't know the name of the sniper, but they knew the stories. A man who could hit anyone who moved, a man who seemed invisible, a man who killed in complete silence. They called him the White Death, believing he was something more than human, but he wasn't. He was simply a man who refused to surrender his country. The Winter War was brutal for both sides, but especially for the Soviets. Their high command could not comprehend how a small nation was resisting so effectively. They had more men, more tanks, more aircraft, more everything. Yet the Finnish soldiers fought with a combination of skill, mobility, and sheer willpower the Soviets had never encountered. And at the center of the chaos was Hayha. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't pose for dramatic photographs. He didn't write letters bragging about his achievements. He avoided interviews. He avoided attention. He slept in small dugouts, carved into snowbanks or simple barracks shared with fellow soldiers. He ate whatever food was available, and every morning he prepared his rifle and returned to the forest. Soviet commanders eventually placed a bounty on his head. They wanted him eliminated at any cost. Killing him, they hoped, would shift morale. But the more they tried to hunt him, the more their own casualties grew. Counter-snipers failed, teams failed, artillery failed, entire units were warned. If you see a glint, a shadow, or anything in the snow, hide. But by then, it was often too late. Hayha's numbers rose so fast that other Finnish soldiers could not believe them. But they were true. He achieved hundreds of confirmed kills with his rifle, possibly more than 500 in under 100 days, during some of the harshest battlefield conditions ever seen in the Second World War, all while remaining calm, polite, modest, and almost completely silent. Yet, despite all of this, Simo Häyhä did not consider himself special. He once said he simply did what was required, nothing more. He never glorified war. He never celebrated what he had done. He saw himself as a farmer defending his homeland, nothing else. But his story was far from over. And what happened next would push him to the very edge of human endurance. As January 1940 began, the Winter War reached a point that no Soviet strategist had predicted. The Red Army, convinced that Finland would collapse in days, was now losing entire formations in the forests around Kola. Exhaustion, fear, and confusion spread through Soviet infantry units. Morale fell with every attempt to advance. They were not fighting a conventional army. They were fighting the terrain, the cold, the silence, and a sniper they still could not find. From the Soviet perspective, the most terrifying part was not knowing where the White Death was. He didn't fire constantly. He didn't engage recklessly. He didn't waste ammunition. He waited, hours, sometimes an entire day. And then he struck with such precision that soldiers began avoiding specific ridgelines simply because rumors said he might be somewhere nearby. A Soviet officer later wrote in his diary that the forest itself has turned against us. But what they were truly afraid of was a single man hidden inside it. Finnish soldiers often found Hayha alone at dusk, emerging from the woods with a calm expression, brushing snow from his uniform, as if returning from a routine walk. They asked how the day had gone. He gave a number, then he carefully cleaned his rifle, ate quietly, and slept for a few hours before returning to the cold darkness before dawn. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He didn't complain. He didn't talk about fear. In his mind, every day was the same. Defend Finland one shot at a time. By mid-January, his kill count was climbing so quickly that officers had difficulty believing the reports. Yet every claim had witnesses. Every claim was confirmed. The Winter War was becoming a legend, and within that legend, Hayha stood out even among Finland's elite soldiers. Sometime during this period, Soviet commanders launched a specific mission: eliminate the White Death. They deployed counter-snipers across the region, including some of the Red Army's best. These snipers had scopes, better equipment, and specific orders to hunt down whoever was killing so many Soviet troops. But Hayha knew the forest better than anyone they had ever faced. Counter-snipers tried to search for him from trees, ridges, or shadows. Hayha anticipated every tactic. He studied enemy behavior with almost scientific detail. If a Soviet marksman attempted to flank him, Hayha shifted positions silently. When counter-snipers tried to lure him by exposing bait targets, he ignored them. When they attempted to track his footprints, he moved across hard-packed snow or rocks, leaving almost nothing behind. On one occasion, a Soviet sniper got close, far closer than usual. He identified what he believed was Hayha's position and prepared to take the shot. But Hayha had already seen the faint glint of the enemy's scope, a reflection no Soviet soldier expected to betray his position. Hayha fired first. The bullet passed directly through the scope and into the sniper behind it. When Finnish soldiers inspected the weapon later, the damage left them speechless. It was the kind of shot that happens once in a lifetime, if ever. To Hayha, it was simply execution of technique he had practiced for decades. As the Winter War dragged on, Soviet command grew frustrated. They could not advance through Kola. Every attempt to push Finnish lines ended in disaster. Troops froze on open ground. Tanks bogged down in deep snow. Skiing Finnish soldiers launched lightning-fast ambushes, and every day, Soviet units reported additional losses from the same invisible riflemen. Soviet morale eroded sharply. Soldiers who had survived battles against the Germans just months earlier found the Finnish front far more terrifying. They expected conventional warfare. Instead, they encountered an enemy who vanished into the trees and struck with merciless precision. For Soviet infantry, there was a constant oppressive tension. Is today the day I step into his sights? Is he behind that tree? Is he in that ridge, that shadow, that snowbank? Some soldiers refused to advance unless artillery bombarded the forest first. Others volunteered to move at night, believing the White Death could not see them. Then they were wrong. Hayha preferred low light. Darkness amplified sound. Snow reflected even faint movement. On several nights, Soviet units crawled forward slowly, hoping to reach Finnish lines unseen. Hayha detected them by the slightest crunch of snow, then eliminated the lead man with a single shot, forcing the rest of the squad to retreat in panic. His presence turned entire areas of the battlefield into forbidden zones. Meanwhile, Finnish officers began assigning Hayha to the most critical sectors, areas where Soviet pressure was strongest, where breakthroughs threatened the entire defense line. He responded with the same discipline and calm he had every day since the war began. He never refused an assignment. He never asked for special treatment. He simply moved to the designated position, assessed the terrain, found the perfect concealed location, and waited. By early February, his confirmed kill count had surpassed 400. By mid-February, some estimates placed it above 500. He had accomplished this in less than 100 days. He was not celebrated publicly. Finnish command did not broadcast his numbers widely, fearing propaganda backlash or drawing too much attention to one soldier. But among the troops, his reputation grew stronger. His calmness under fire inspired fellow soldiers. His reliability reassured officers. His near-superhuman results became a symbol of Finnish resistance. Yet despite all the stories, all the fear he struck into the Soviet army, and all the respect he earned from his own, Hayha remained humble. He once said he was just a farmer doing his duty. He never sought fame. He refused interviews, declined promotions that would remove him from the front, and preferred to keep fighting alongside his unit. As February ended, the Soviet Union intensified its offensive. Reinforcements poured in, new tanks, more artillery, more troops. Stalin demanded results. The Red Army ordered massive assaults to break Finnish lines once and for all. The fighting near Kola became even fiercer. Explosions thundered across the forest, trees shattered. Snow turned dark with dirt and smoke. The temperature rose slightly, making the snow heavier and movement harder. Through all of it, Hayha continued his work. But on March 6, 1940, the war finally caught up to him. That morning, Hayha positioned himself near a forward Finnish trench. Soviet troops were launching a major assault, pouring across the open field. Machine gun fire rattled across the snow. Mortar explosions echoed through the trees. Finnish defenders fought desperately to hold the line. Hayha was where he always was, in the most dangerous position. As he prepared to fire, a Soviet soldier on skis detected his approximate location and signaled for supporting fire. A Soviet marksman, likely one of the elite counter-snipers assigned to hunt him, took aim. The shot came before Hayha saw it. A bullet struck him in the lower left jaw, ripping through his face and tearing half of it apart. Finnish soldiers dragged him to cover. His face was destroyed. They believed he would die within minutes. Blood streamed into the snow. His breathing was shallow. When medics bandaged him, the wound was so catastrophic that they could barely identify him. His comrades whispered, with grief and disbelief, "They finally got him." But even then, Hayha did not die. Doctors worked for hours. He was unconscious for days. When he finally woke up, it was March 13th, the exact day the Winter War ended. He opened his eyes and asked only, "Has the war ended?" When they told him Finland had survived, he nodded and fell back asleep. He had done what he came to do. He had defended his home. When Simo Häyhä finally regained consciousness in the field hospital, doctors did not expect him to speak, let alone survive. Half of his face had been destroyed by the explosive Soviet bullet. His upper jaw was shattered, and bone fragments had torn into his cheek. The left side of his face had collapsed inward. His lips were almost completely gone. For several days, he drifted in and out of a fevered state, unaware that the war he fought so fiercely had already ended. But when he finally woke enough to understand his surroundings, his first question was not about himself. He asked, "Is Finland still standing?" When the nurse nodded and said the Winter War had ended that morning, Hayha calmly closed his eyes again. He had nothing more to ask. Everything he cared about, his homeland, his people, his forest, had survived against impossible odds. Finland had endured, and so had he. The Winter War lasted only 105 days, but its impact on world history was enormous. Against one of the largest military forces on Earth, Finland resisted with extraordinary determination, and at the center of that resistance stood men like Simo Häyhä, ordinary citizens who became extraordinary warriors when their homeland needed them. But Häyhä's role was unlike anyone else's. With over 500 confirmed kills, and possibly far more, he became the most lethal sniper not just of the Winter War, but of the Second World War itself. A single man who changed the momentum of battles, a single rifle that inflicted more losses than entire infantry companies, a single sniper whose name still appears in military training manuals nearly a century later. Yet despite those numbers, he would never call himself a hero. After months in recovery, Hayha required extensive reconstructive surgery. His jaw was rebuilt using fragments of bone. His face would never look the same again. His speech was slowed, deepened, and changed permanently. The wounds were devastating, but he endured them with the same stoic calm he had shown in the forest. When he was finally strong enough to walk again, he returned to rural life with no dramatic announcements, no interviews, no attempts to capitalize on his fame. He simply went home. Over the next decades, he lived quietly in the Finnish countryside, hunting, farming, raising dogs, and avoiding public attention. He never boasted. He never exaggerated. He never embraced the legendary status people gave him. In fact, he rarely spoke about the war at all. and when he did, he spoke plainly, without pride or regret. In one interview late in life, a journalist asked him how he became such an exceptional marksman. Hayha shrugged and said, "Practice." Another time, someone asked whether he felt remorse for the hundreds of men he had killed. He responded with the same directness, "I did what I was told as well as I could." For Hayha, the war had not been about hatred. It had not been about ideology. It was defense, simple and absolute. The enemy had invaded his home. He stopped them. That was the entire story in his mind. But to history, the story was far greater. Military experts around the world still study his techniques. His patience and stillness under extreme pressure remain unmatched. His ability to disappear into the landscape is still considered one of the greatest feats of camouflage and fieldcraft ever recorded. Modern snipers in the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Finland all analyze his methods. One American sniper instructor summed it up during a training session. If you want to understand precision, discipline, and psychological control, study Simo Häyhä. He was the real thing. But Hayha's skill with a rifle wasn't the only reason he is remembered. It was something deeper, something rarer. He embodied a kind of quiet courage that doesn't need words, a courage that doesn't seek recognition, a courage rooted in love for one's home, not hatred for one's enemy. Even his Soviet adversaries eventually respected him. Decades after the war, when a Russian historian was asked about the White Death, he replied, "He fought for his country with honor. He was not cruel. He was simply very, very good." As Finland rebuilt after the war, Hayha kept to himself. He lived in a small house, tended to his farm, hunted with friends, and enjoyed the peaceful life he had fought so hard to protect. The man who had terrified an entire invading army returned to the things he loved: silence, nature, and the freedom of the forest. He remained physically small, but mentally unshakable. People often visited him hoping to hear war stories. He always redirected the conversation to hunting, dogs, or the weather. He preferred simple things. He preferred normal life. In 1998, at 92 years old, Hayha gave one of the only detailed interviews of his life. When asked how he managed to survive the war, he smiled slightly and said, "I had good eyesight, and I loved my country." When asked how he became so capable with a rifle, he answered, "By aiming carefully." When asked how he felt about being the deadliest sniper of the Second World War, he shook his head. "I never thought about that. I just did my duty." That was who he was until the end. No dramatics, no self-aggrandizing, just honesty. Simo Häyhä passed away on April 1st, 2002, at the age of 96. He died peacefully, surrounded by the same kind of quiet he had always sought. In Finland, his legacy remains profound. Soldiers still study him, hunters still admire him, citizens still honor him as a symbol of national resilience. But beyond Finland, across Europe, across America, across the world, his story endures for a different reason. He reminds us that history is often shaped not by generals, not by politicians, not by vast armies, but by individuals who rise to extraordinary heights when circumstances demand it. He reminds us that courage can be silent, that patriotism can be humble, that one person, guided by skill and conviction, can alter the course of war in ways no one expects. And he reminds us of something else, something easily forgotten in grand narratives of empires and battles. Sometimes the most powerful force in a war is not the largest army, but the determination of one man defending the place he calls home. As historians look back on the Second World War, they often speak of massive movements of troops, industrial output, strategic bombing campaigns, political shifts, and global alliances. But woven through that enormous tapestry are the stories of individuals whose actions, though small compared to the grand scale of the war, left a lasting imprint. Among them, Simo Häyhä stands out. A quiet farmer, a devoted soldier, a master of patience, the most efficient sniper the world has ever recorded. A man who never bragged, never sought reward, and never allowed war to harden his character. He lived his life the way he fought, quietly, precisely, and with complete dedication. In the end, the soldier known as the White Death did not define himself by the war. He defined himself by something far simpler and far stronger, the enduring love he had for the forests, the freedom, and the land of Finland. And that is why his story is still told today, not just as a tale of unbelievable skill, but as a reminder of what a single determined human being is capable of.